Hello there. Welcome to Conversations About Aging. Today we're going to talk about planning for our futures. I'm Diane Atwood. I write the blog Catching Health, and I host the podcast Conversations About Aging and our Facebook group. And my guest is Barbara Schlichtman. She is an attorney with the Maine Center for Elder Law and here in Portland and also in Kennebunk. And we've got a behind-the-scenes person, and I'm making her, if she doesn't knock over the tripod, come over. This is Catherine Burrs,
Hey everybody.
Burrs Creative, and she is pushing the buttons for us, and she's also going to be monitoring. If you have any questions, you can just write them in as comments. If you want to tell us how absolutely wonderful we are, you can do that too. You can hit like, whatever. So today, planning for the future. I know it's not something that we like to think about, but you have to think about that notion that what if you could no longer speak for yourself? Who would you want to speak for you? Who would you want to make important decisions, to carry out your wishes, to take care of your bills, your personal affairs? Does your family even know what your final wishes are? Do you know what your parents are? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's why Barbara's here. So Barbara, the first thing when somebody comes to see you, what's that first step, that thing that you tell them, if you do nothing else before you go to bed tonight, this is what you need to do?
Right. That's a good question. So in the introduction, Diane introduced a lot of the issues that people deal with, and it has to do with selecting a fiduciary. There's a term called surrogate decision making, and you want to have somebody in place to make decisions for you if you're no longer able. And that can be for healthcare and financial. So I think the first step at a minimum, for example, if somebody comes to see me, at a minimum, I make sure they have a financial power of attorney document in place. And the reason that is so important is if somebody does not have a financial power of attorney in place, they trip and they bump their head and they're no longer able to speak for themselves or make decisions, somebody needs to be able to deal with bills and financial matters. And without the power of attorney, people have to go to court and get what's known as a conservatorship. And so you'll hear about guardianship and conservatorship, and we can talk more about that later. But it pulls in court supervision, and it just becomes a more expensive and more stressful problem that can be avoided with a simple financial power of attorney.
And if you have to do the conservatorship or the guardianship, that would take valuable time too. I mean, you need to be able to act quickly, I would think.
Right, and so and courts are busy, so it's not something that can happen immediately. Sometimes you can do it on an emergency basis. But even with that, at best you could get an emergency appointment, I don't know, maybe within a couple of weeks or a month. If there are I don't want to get too technical, but if there are notice requirements, that could also become a problem. And if you use an attorney, you're looking at several $1,000s to do that. And again, all of that could be avoided with preparing ahead, selecting the fiduciary who you want to make decisions for you, and putting it in your power of attorney document.
That term, fiduciary, that is
Good.
just...
So fiduciary means when somebody has a legal duty to make decisions that are in your best interest. So that could go with finances, it could go with managing assets. Managing assets could include things like taking care of your house. Often that's the single most, the largest part of somebody's estate. So you want to have somebody who you wholeheartedly trust in that role.
Now, there are 8 kids in my family, and my parents split up who was on the financial power of attorney. As I was the executor, the oldest, so I got to be on everything. But then I had some siblings who shared the financial power of attorney, and some siblings shared the medical. So they kind of split it up, so all the power didn't go to just one crowd. Now, that doesn't always happen, but is that a worthwhile thing to do, or should one person be in charge of everything?
No, I think it's great. If everyone can get along and make decisions in a unified manner, I think it's great to be able to share the duties. Because it's important, these are important decisions that everybody should make. Where that becomes a problem is if people are not in agreement, and that can become an expensive problem.
And that's why it's so important to have those conversations ahead of time and to
Absolutely.
Designate who you want to be responsible for what.
Mhm.
So you've got financial power of attorney, and then you've got medical. Is there a power of attorney that combines everything into one? Or
No,
does it have
it's
to
really-
be separate?
There might be some attorneys who merge it into one big document. I think I've only seen that one time. So it's really two separate documents, two separate roles. So financial power of attorney and medical power of attorney.
Now, having a medical power of attorney, that just means if some important decisions have to be made about end-of-life care.
Yep. So those typically come into play if somebody's in a persistent vegetative state, irreversible coma, or they have a terminal illness that is expected to kill the person soon, that they're not likely to recover. And so when that happens, then the healthcare directive comes into place. Now, I also see where they come into place for like temporary disability. Those definitions may not cover somebody being unconscious directly after surgery that they're going to recover from, but the healthcare directive can be useful. If I look at it as the person can no longer communicate with the medical providers, then you've designated who is going to step in and be the point person to talk to.
That period.
Yeah, and one thing is sometimes people want to appoint all of their children to make the healthcare decisions. But what hospitals really want to see is one point person to be the final person who they talk to, because a doctor doesn't want to be put in the role of being a mediator between children who disagree on healthcare decisions. So everybody can talk about it, but you really need to appoint one person who's the spokesperson.
The last word.
Mhm.
So the living will, is that the same thing as a healthcare directive?
So that can get confusing for people. So in Maine, in the law, we refer to the document as the Advanced Healthcare Directive. And you can get, in Maine, you can get one for free off the internet from the Maine Hospital Association. They have a form that you can download. And if you can get 2 witnesses, then it's a valid document. And what that does, that also encompasses living will. Advanced Healthcare Directive can encompass the same thing as a living will, and what's the other term you have? My mind's blank right now. It's
The proxy?
Yeah, healthcare proxy. So healthcare proxy is naming that healthcare agent who will be making those decisions. So Maine's Advanced Healthcare Directive takes care of all of that. There are other forms out there that are also valid. I think one that I often see people using is called the five living wishes. That seems to be a popular form that's out there. But if you're in the state of Maine, I would recommend using the Maine hospital form, because I've been told by medical people they prefer that form because they know the form, they know what page to turn to, they're familiar with it. So in the case of a crisis, you would want them to be able to understand and absorb that form quickly.
And you know what? Oops, Catherine.
So we are having some issues with connectivity on the wireless network. So just everyone, please be patient with us.
Sorry.
I just switched it to something else. Hopefully that helps.
Okay. Well, I hope you're there. We're trying. And if we have to, I know Barbara will come back. And we'll do what we can.
Well, it'll be recorded, so we'll have
Okay, alrighty. What I was going to say is that I can provide a link in the group and on the Catching Health Facebook page to the Maine Hospital Association.
Oh, great.
Where you can
Yeah.
download the forms. So as much as we love you, we don't always need you. We can just go online and get forms if necessary.
That form,
That form.
the
Okay.
healthcare care directive form.
So one thing that to me seems critical, once again, is to have those conversations so that you can sit down with whomever you want to designate and say, listen, this is why I want it to be this way. I have to, I did tell, well, I hate to disparage him, but my husband, exactly what I wanted to happen, what songs I wanted to play.
Yeah.
And he reminded me that, well, you know, memorial services are for the people who are left behind, so I hope we can have permission if we want to add a little something
Yeah.
or not. But I guess that's where love and caring comes into
Yeah.
play.
Good communication.
Yeah, good communication. And sometimes, you know, the kids will want to understand, well, why do you want to have that done? And I think that's a valid conversation, an
Yeah.
important conversation. So you fill out the forms. What do you do with them?
That's a good question. So you want to make sure they're accessible so that they can be utilized. With the financial power of attorney, you would want the person who you've named as the name is called an agent, your agent under power of attorney. You would want to make sure your agent knows that the form exists and where it is. In my opinion, it's a good idea to go ahead and give the person the form in case they need to utilize it, they have it. The same with the healthcare directive. Give it to the agent. Healthcare directives should also go to doctors, the medical providers. It should be part of the medical record. And then in our office, we subscribe our clients to a service called DocuBank. And it's a service where we upload PDFs of their healthcare documents to this company. And then they receive what looks like a little insurance card to carry in their wallet. And then if you travel or you go to an emergency room or something, then your healthcare documents can be faxed or emailed immediately 24 hours a day. So accessing the forms is important. I think I've heard of one study that showed if people had their healthcare directive, it increased the likelihood of dying in the manner that they wanted to die by like 70%.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it is important that they can be accessed. And I want to make a distinction here between the healthcare directive is different than a do not resuscitate order. Can we just talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely.
So the healthcare directive is where you make your end of life choices, like you don't want measures that prolong the process of dying, such as artificial nutrition and hydration, or if you want pain relief, even if it hastens death. So those decisions can be made, and that's where you express end-of-life wishes. The do not resuscitate order is a separate document that if you've gone into the hospital, then you've probably filled that out before surgery or something. So that is saying that if your heart stops or if you stop breathing, you don't want to be revived. That's very different. That has to be signed with the doctor, and that makes it a doctor's order. So for example, when you download the healthcare directive form, most of the pages are healthcare directive. The last page is a do not resuscitate order. And those are very powerful documents. Those are documents that when you hear of people putting them on their refrigerator, so if the ambulance comes, the EMTs can find it. People actually do that, and I've confirmed with somebody who is an EMT. He said, yes, if they can identify and confirm that the person in need of care is the same person who signed that do not resuscitate order, they will not resuscitate. They will honor that order. So it's really powerful.
So the one that you have at your home, does that have to be signed by a physician too, or is it just when
No.
you're in the hospital?
No, just
So-
the do not resuscitate order. So the Advanced Healthcare Directive is executed with two witnesses in Maine. There's a space to have it notarized. I recommend also getting it notarized because if you go out of state, there are some states that do require the notarization.
And how easy is it to get something notarized?
So most people can go to their bank and their bank will notarize something for free. If you have an account at the bank, that's typical. Yeah. Otherwise, UPS stores, they always have
I didn't know
notaries.
that.
Yeah.
I think you can get your passport pictures taken
Yeah,
there
you can.
too.
So just go to UPS.
Go on a different kind of trip. Another type of power of attorney, durable.
Okay.
I've heard that term. What is a durable power of attorney?
So when I refer to financial power of attorney, that's typically a financial durable power of attorney. So the term durable means that something stays in effect even after the person loses capacity. Up until 2010, in the state of Maine, the word durable had to be there. The law was changed so that now the presumption is that a power of attorney is durable unless it states otherwise. But an example of a power of attorney that would not be durable, say for example, you sign a limited power of attorney authorizing somebody to go to a house closing for you.
Oh, okay.
And then you lose capacity. Well, that power of attorney would lose effect and it wouldn't be durable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about living wills.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about regular wills.
Okay?
We should all have a will, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
And we can get those online too? I mean, can we do those online too? Or do we need a lawyer?
I wouldn't recommend. I have to say, I would only recommend downloading the healthcare directive.
Mhm.
I am very uneasy with people do-it-yourselfing their estate planning documents, because if you have a mistake, it ends up costing a lot more money in the long run. And a common problem that I see come through the office where people have downloaded a power of attorney from the internet. Maine requires certain notices that have to be there for the power of attorney to be valid. Well, there's no guarantee that online services are going to comply with that and put the proper notices in. And those notices have to have specific language. And another example would be powers of attorney. There are certain powers that have to be specifically articulated, like changing beneficiaries, creating a trust, making gifts. There's a whole list of things that have to be stated. And if you do your own power of attorney online, you're not being advised on what specific powers need to be stated. And you would think, so the document says this person can do anything that I would legally be able to do if I were there. You would think, oh, well, that encompasses everything that I
Covers
could
it all,
do.
yeah.
And it doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't. There are a whole host of powers that have to be specifically stated. You have to have proper notices. So I could just never encourage anybody to do their own power of attorney.
Or
It's
wills.
or will, because the power of attorney is I think an affordable document that almost any attorney could help with. And wills, same thing. You might think, oh, I just want a simple will that leaves everything to my spouse, and if my spouse is dead, everything to my children.
Right.
It's called a sweetheart will. It's really basic. But you might not know what questions to ask. So say, for example, one of the children is now on disability. Well, you might not realize you need to build a special needs trust into that will to prevent that child from losing their disability upon your death. There are just issues that non-attorneys just may not know to ask. So I just think it's good to work with an attorney and get proper advice.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard so many horror stories about families that have totally disintegrated after the will was read, and then things get contested.
Yeah.
And I've often thought, well, how it's written in the will, how could it be contested?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned a special needs trust.
Can I add one thing before we move on? I'm just going to add this because a lot of times people spend a lot of time thinking about what exactly their will is going to say, but then they don't realize that in fact nothing's going to pass under their will. And so here's an example of that. You have a couple, they own the house jointly, husband and wife own the house. The assets are an investment account, joint bank accounts, and an IRA. Well, the house is going to go to the surviving spouse, right, as a joint owner. IRAs go to the beneficiaries.
Right. That's individual retirement accounts.
So individual retirement accounts go to beneficiaries. And then say there's a payable on death instruction on the bank accounts. Those are all what we call transfers by operation of law. And so none of them will pass under the will. And so you have to, part of the estate planning process in creating the will is also looking at where are these assets going to go upon death. Because you want to make sure, if in fact you want $5,000 to go to this grandchild, etc., you need to make sure there's going to be money in the estate to pass under the will.
And I discovered after my parents passed away, they had some stock And I thought, well, I'm just going to sell the stock and split it 8 ways. Well, it didn't work that way. The stock had to be transferred to the estate, and then it had to be sold, and it wasn't easy. It was a pain in the neck, actually.
It is.
Okay. You mentioned special needs trust. So that is if somebody's on disability and they're only allowed to have so much money in their bank account, or they lose that disability, the special needs trust protects if there's like a $5,000.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is one of the better tools that I'm aware of that Congress has created. So if people are on, and this can be somebody who has acquired a disability during their lifetime or somebody born with a disability. But if they're receiving some kind of government supports, either healthcare, income, housing, there are trusts that can be created that the assets inside that trust are not considered assets for the individual. So they don't lose these what are called means tested programs, meaning the government looks at what means they have, and if they're below a certain amount, they get the benefit. So the trust protects people for these means tested programs. And they just are really beneficial for people to prepare prior to death rather than after. And we can talk more about that if some questions come up or anybody wants a little more detail on that.
Okay. We've talked about it, I think, quite a bit. You do encourage, when you go in to fill out all your paperwork, you encourage people to bring along the spouse, to bring along the children, to be able to have those open conversations. Some parents don't want to divulge all the details to the kids, like about how much money that they have. So what is important to tell the kids up front and what doesn't matter really?
That's a great question. It's really up to the client's discretion, what they want the kids to know and not know. Many times parents are happy to have their children sitting in on the meeting and hearing everything, but that's not always the case. You know, some parents don't want their children to know what they own or where they are. They've always been fiercely independent and they intend to stay that way. So I honor that. What the children should know at a minimum is who to call if something happens, you know, where the documents are. And that can be achieved a couple of ways. A good thing to do that probably a lot of your viewers may already have is, you know, create some kind of a binder or a handoff, like things you need to know. This is my accountant's name. This is my attorney's name. This is where my documents are. Something we came up in our office, we created refrigerator magnets that simply say, my estate planning documents are at Maine Center for Elder Law with our phone number. And the motivation to that is exactly what you're describing because you know, people live all scattered around the country and you have adult children show up in the event of a crisis and they don't know where to begin. So they're kind of on a detective mission. So we're leaving them a clue on the refrigerator to call us.
Well, I'm going to give a plug right now for Barb Sidorik. I'd written a blog post about her. She has created this, I think it's like this thick resource guide for people. She's got all the questions and everything, and you just fill in the blanks. Just go to lastingmatters.com and you can see it. And I'll also put a link online to the blog post I wrote about her so people can...
It's a good service.
Yeah. Alrighty, so where are we here? We are right here. We have a question from Bev. Bev sent me an email. She wants to know, how do you go about finding a reputable financial planner or financial advisor?
Good. That's another great question. I think number one, you want somebody you're comfortable talking to. I think that's important. But I think an important element to know is and I can't remember the exact term, but some financial planners are under a fiduciary duty to their clients. So that means when they make decisions and give advice, they are under a legal obligation to do what is in the best interest of their client. And I point this out because we would all assume that that's always the case, but in fact it's not. So when you're talking to somebody, interviewing them on whether to work with them, a good question to ask, I think a key question to ask, is do you have a fiduciary duty to me? And there's a specific certification that requires that the planner has the fiduciary duty. And the other track is people don't have the fiduciary duty. And I am not saying this to disparage or criticize any group of professionals, but it's just to be aware that they earn their money from selling products, financial products, and those people may not be under a legal fiduciary duty to do what's in your best interest. So I think when you're selecting a financial planner, is the first thing to do is ask, do you have a fiduciary duty to me? And then talk to them about what that looks like. If the answer is yes, they'll explain it and they'll explain what they're going to do and how they're compensated. And if the answer is no, it still raises the conversation that they'll explain how your interests are going to be protected. And again, how they are compensated. I think those are the key things you would want to look at.
So by products, what are you talking about?
Products would be annuities, would be a common product. Funds, advisors who undertake a lot of trades, generate a lot of fees, which can become expensive for investments. In the elderly, in an elder demographic, I often see where people are sold annuities. Those are not always a good idea. There are a couple of problems with that. An annuity is inflexible, and so depending on what happens down the road, say with nursing home benefits, that annuity could cause problems. The other thing is, but older people are sometimes, I think often, they're drawn to annuities because they like the idea of a guaranteed income stream.
Mm-hmm.
And so annuities are something that they can be sold, they generate a fee for people, and
You just would be wary.
Yeah, I think advisors, they even get, an annual fee on the annuity. So I'm not saying it's always bad, but that's an example of a product that is sold to people.
Well, it sort of almost segues into what I wanted to talk about, like us wanting to, most of us I think would love to just live and die in our own homes.
Yeah.
But we will talk in a minute about what happens if you can't do that, what are some of the things that you should have in place or be aware of. First, I wanted to ask if you had any legal advice for somebody whose parent is showing obvious signs of dementia, has not done any planning. How do you handle such a situation?
Yeah. Get them to an elder law attorney. That's the first thing, seriously. Because if they still have enough capacity to start to look at naming their fiduciaries, that's the best case scenario.
That's that first step you talked about.
They're decision makers. And I mean, part of it, I think one of the very strong reasons that people refuse to do the planning is they don't want to give up control. People are accustomed to being in control of their lives, making their own decisions, having independence. And you have to respect that. That's a hard thing to lose. And but what I think people need to realize, if they prepare their legal documents and they name who their decision makers are going to be when they can no longer, that's still retaining control, because you're controlling who is going to make those decisions. Right. And it gives you the time and space and legal way to spell out what kinds of decisions you would like to be made on your behalf. And the other important thing I would say is get with like a geriatric care manager or an occupational therapist, somebody who works with keeping people in their homes. The sooner people start to plan for that, the better it works, because there are adaptations that can be made to the homes to make them more age friendly. And so So I think those are the two first steps. You get to an elder law attorney and get the documents in place and find some kind of an aging professional to help make the house safe, maybe find some support services, somebody who non-medical home care
home care, if
coming
you can
in,
afford it.
even for a short time. Like I think they have a minimum number of hours they need per time, but even a few hours a week, that can be useful because it starts to ease the transition to having somebody else in the home to
Right.
be helpful, and it's eyes on the person.
And you know what's happening across the country, across I think the globe actually, but here in Maine, there are lots of age-friendly communities, all kinds of resources and programs that are being developed or already developed in communities depending on what the need is for that particular population. Bath Housing Authority, for instance, in Bath, they've got a wonderful program for people who own their own homes and want to stay in them and qualify financially. They will use their maintenance people to come in and put in garden, the handrails. The post I did with a family, their washer and dryer was down in the basement, so they moved up
Great.
the plumbing and the electricity to the first floor, and it turned out to be cost effective. It was cheaper to make those changes, to those adaptations than it would have been for these people to move elsewhere. So,
That's good.
so most of us, we want to stay in our own homes.
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Oh, we have a question. All right. So before I keep on, what's our question?
It's from Carolyn, and she says, I have 2 sons. Can they both be named as decision makers? I'm 72, and my husband is coming up on 74. We know we have to start planning.
Good question. So number one is I would recommend, yes, they can both be decision makers if they get along. If they're in agreement and they're going to be able to work together, then that's a good scenario. They can be co-agents for the power of attorney. They could be co-personal representatives for the will. But then back to the healthcare directive, you would need to name one of them as the healthcare agent, and then the other one could be a successor, but you could have language saying that you would want them to collaborate and communicate with each other before a decision is made.
You talked about that earlier, how the physicians in hospital setting, nursing home, whatever, they want one point person.
Right.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Carolyn, for that question. I appreciate it. So we have a situation where somebody is not able to stay in their own home and needs to move to some kind of a long-term care facility. Maybe temporarily, maybe permanently. Do you recommend that everybody gets long-term care insurance, or are there certain scenarios that you...
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a tough one because the long-term care insurance industry has changed dramatically. I forget the statistics, but at one point, let's say there were 140 companies offering long-term care insurance. Now I think it might be like 4 companies that offer long-term care insurance. And what happened is when it was first being sold, underwriters underestimated how long people would live and the cost of medical care. So the industry really had to go through it had to reinvent itself. So if you do shop for long-term care insurance now, there are different products. They've changed, and some of these I think are good products. For example, they're coming up with hybrid policies where you pay for the long-term care insurance, but if you never end up using it, it can then evolve into life insurance, to where it would then pay back, the premiums would pay back to your family in some form.
Beneficiary. Okay.
I would say yes, anybody who can qualify medically and afford the premium, long-term care insurance is a great idea. I think the qualifying standards are pretty high for medical purposes. because of what I just described. They're trying to be very careful to cost, I guess you'd be cost containing. But no, it's a great thing. And I think it's important for the future because my personal opinion is as the baby boomers continue to age, there are 3 ways to pay for long-term care. People can either self-insure, that means you pay for it out of your own money.
Private pay, is that the term?
Private pay, or you use long-term care insurance, or you rely on Medicaid. And in Maine, that's called Maine Care. For example, in Massachusetts, it's Mass Health. Every state gives Medicaid its own name because it's a state-administered program. But my feeling is, as baby boomers continue to age, the Medicaid program is going to continue to be, I don't want to say depleted, but it's really going to be strained. And so if you can come up with your own method to pay, whether it's insurance or private pay, I think that's a good safety net for people who are fortunate enough to be able to afford that.
They have family that's willing to move back home with you and help take care of you like they did
exactly.
in the old days.
Exactly.
So sometimes people can go, they can private pay for a while, and the term is what, spend down? And I'm going to talk about that. Can they do a combination of things, like long-term care insurance pays for a certain percentage and then you can private pay, or?
Yeah, and that's typically how it works. So a long-term care policy it depends on the policy, they vary, but a typical policy may say the maximum daily rate that we will pay is $250 a day. And then if you're in a nursing home, well, the daily rate might be $350 a day. So that means insurance is covering $250 of it, and then you're private paying $100 a day.
Until you run out of private money and...
Yeah, or the policy runs out.
Runs
Often the policies, they'll either have a maximum amount they'll spend or a duration they'll last for something.
Dang, we're living longer. So Maine Care or Medicaid, what do you have, how do you qualify? Just run out of money? I mean, what are the qualifying factors?
Well, it's finances. So we'll call it Medicaid for this purpose because there's some people from outside of Maine. So Medicaid has a number of programs. And so for this conversation, we're talking about Medicaid long-term care, which pays for nursing home benefits. And I'm clarifying that because there are different qualifications for all the different Medicaid programs. So we're talking about long-term care, nursing level care, Medicaid.
So nursing level care does not mean assisted living.
Correct.
Because I think it's important for us to differentiate.
Okay.
It's like a spectrum, like you might start off here and then end up there.
Yeah, so the journey that people go on, they start with independent living, right? Where you have, that's often where, these age and place compounds, you buy your cottage, you live independently, and then you need a little more care, so you go to assisted living. And the technical definition of assisted living is you need help with 2 activities of daily living. These are called ADLs. So if you are starting to be involved with the system, you'll hear that term, ADLs, activities of daily living. Examples of that are dressing yourself, feeding yourself, transferring from your bed to your chair, things like that. So if you need help with 2 of those, that shows a need for assisted living. And then if you need help with 3 of those, that's nursing level care.
And then are there different levels of nursing home care? Like there's the skilled and the non-skilled? And
skilled nursing care is rehab.
So that's usually a temporary thing. You've broken your hip, you had your surgery, get back on your feet.
Yeah.
And with all the luck in the world, you go back home again.
Right.
Okay.
So that's a good way to describe it. So can I just back up and give? Okay. So the way the scenario is, somebody falls and breaks their hip, they go to the hospital, that's Medicare pays for that, right?
Okay.
Because it's a hospital stay. After that, they then are discharged to rehab or skilled nursing care. Medicare is still paying for that. That's still Medicare dollars. So everybody over 65, for the most part, has Medicare. That's the health insurance that people carry. So, and then there's supplemental Medicare policy. So once you're in rehab, Medicare will pay up to 100 days, but that is not guaranteed.
Oh,
So this is an example where we often get the calls. Somebody is in rehab, and for whatever reason, the care team has decided that rehab is no longer appropriate. And then the family is informed that your rehab or skilled nursing is going to end Tuesday. They only have to
and it's Friday.
yeah, they only have to, I think they only have to give you 2 days notice that it's ending. And starting Tuesday, you're going to be private pay nursing level care. And that's when we get the phone calls, because then people call and say, how are we going to pay $10,000 a month for nursing level care?
Wow.
So then after rehab ends, that's when Medicare stops. And that's when we get to this point where you're either Medicaid, private pay, or long-term care insurance.
Okay, and
so then qualifying, that's
that's
where I
right,
was
qualifying,
going.
and like what if you own your own home?
Yep.
Things like that.
So to qualify for Medicaid, you can own your own home. That's considered a non-countable asset. Let's work first with an unmarried individual. An unmarried individual owns their home. They broke their hip, and now they're being discharged to a nursing facility. They can qualify for Medicaid if they, these are the assets that do not count. They can own their own home, they can own one car, they can have a funeral plan, and if there's income producing property. So if they have some rental property or they own a business, that can be non-countable if it's actually generating income.
Okay.
Beyond that, it's called the asset test. That varies state to state. Maine is very generous. Maine is the most generous of other states.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
We do have the oldest population tied with Florida.
So an individual can have up to $10,000 and qualify for Medicaid.
And that doesn't have to be used to pay for their stay?
No, they can keep that to cover little incidentals that they'll need throughout the years.
Okay.
Other states, it's lower. It's around $2,000 in other states. Now, that was a single individual. If you have a married individual, it differs. The same non-countable assets, car, house, funeral plan, income-producing property. But if there's a person, if the spouse, which is referred to as the community spouse, because we'll say it's a she, the wife is staying in the community, the husband's going to the institution, the wife can have a higher number. She can have, this is a technical term, but I'm going to use it. She gets what's called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. It's called the CSRA, C-S-R-A. And so if you're outside of Maine, you would want to look up that number and see what your CSRA is. In Maine right now, it's raised incrementally. It's right around $124,000
that you can have in the bank.
So the community spouse can have $124,000 countable assets, and the institutional spouse can have 10. So in Maine, you could have about $135,000 and still qualify for nursing home benefits.
It's amazing. I mean, you get a high level of care, but it's amazing how much it costs.
It costs
Yeah,
a lot
it
of
is.
money. Yeah.
Wow, we've talked about a lot of stuff here. Oh my goodness. I mean, overarching is what we want to know is how can we make sure that what we want to have happen to us, if we can't take care of ourselves, actually, our wishes are carried out.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we've missed that comes top of mind?
Well, I think that exact topic is why pre-planning is so important, because in your healthcare directive, you can describe how you want decisions made for your care. In your financial power of attorney, you can designate somebody who understands and who you've communicated with about your financial decisions. And I just think communicating with family members or close friends, whoever is going to be there for you, communicate, let them know, because if something happens where, let's say, something is triggered to where a guardianship proceeding is necessary, the more you've talked about it and the more you've put in writing indicating your wishes and what you would like to happen, then that's what the court is going to try to honor. For healthcare directives, what the law says is that a doctor is supposed to honor the document unless they have a reason of conscience to think that it doesn't reflect your wishes. So that's one reason to have current documents, to show that they still reflect your wishes. But if you've got family members arguing about what you said and what you would have wanted, then that gives a doctor a reason to think, well, this document may not reflect what they really wanted.
Right.
So yeah, planning and communicating those wishes and writing things down.
And you have a sense, having worked with people for many years, when something's not quite right.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that's the
Yeah.
case.
Catherine, do we have any more questions? All right, well, thank you for helping us, Catherine,
Of
on the other
course.
end there. And thank you, Barbara, for helping us answer our questions. If you have more questions for Barbara, you can put them in the comments and I can still see them and I'll send them to Barbara to answer. You can send me an email, diane@dianeatwood.com. Whatever, we will communicate. I've been talking with Barbara Schlichtman, who's an attorney with the Maine Center for Elder Law. We're in your Portland office, right down to Monument Square, and the main office is in Kennebunk.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, so we're going to try to do another Facebook Live interview next Monday, May 20th at 1 o'clock, and that topic is going to be osteoporosis. I'm going to be talking with Dr. Clifford Rosen. He's a senior scientist at the Maine Medical Center Research Institute. He's currently doing research on why we lose bone as we age and what we can do about it. And Catherine and I will be putting up notices to remind you of it and telling you if you have any questions, just let me know. And Catherine doesn't know this yet, but I'm hoping that in addition to Dr. Rosen and I sitting beside each other, maybe you'll let us take a peek inside the laboratory. I don't know. I can't promise that. That's going to be walking and talking at the same time, and it might be too much for us.
It could be.
I'm not worried though. Anyways, I am Diane Atwood. Please be sure to check out my Catching Health blog and also the Conversations About Aging podcast. You'll find both of them at catchinghealth.com. And this is where we say goodbye and thank you for being with us.